right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on what I believe is episode 199 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. Got my regular co-host, Ian Cummer, streaming live from his dacha in Crimea. We've got our special guest today, Greg Rosen. He is streaming live from Chicago, Illinois. It's 11 a.m. there, 7 p.m. in Crimea, I believe.
Yep.
And we have a title. Our show today is entitled, Is China Our Last Hope Against Empire? Very provocative title. I want to just preface, today's episode by saying we could be living in the most decisive week of the 21st century. I mean, that could be the context within which we are convening this morning. I've catastrophized a few times over our 200 episodes about how important what is going on, but it is really applicable to today and right now. There's just all kinds of news coming out of Telegram, and I think Syed Mohammed Morandi, I think has explicitly warned all the Gulf monarchies to evacuate immediately. Like he has told Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE to immediately evacuate. So, he is expecting, obviously, more bombing from the United States and reprisals from Iran. So, I mean, I don't want to understate the what is going on right now this week, specifically in the global context. Like there's huge events underway, and we're going to be talking about them. And we're going to try and, have some informed disagreement and, just explore the different ways to understand and analyze what's going on. So I think that's very useful. It's enjoyable. If you're into this kind of thing, which, who could not be into this? Like, what could be more important than talking about fucking what's going on? I just don't get it. But so having said all that, to contextualize everything from my perspective, I want to start with this Richard Medhurst 30-minute video that he put out maybe a week ago or so, kind of just, not just implying or suggesting, but stating outright what he believes is the Western strategy, or even the United States strategy. Of course, I don't see it. I don't look at things in terms of nation states, right? I think there's an oligarchy, a Western oligarchy that is controlling nation states, and they've got this, this really, really grand strategy that, isn't just pursuing the interests of a particular nation state, namely the United States. It's pursuing the interests of a class of transnational oligarchs. But he really lays out what the strategy is. He talks about how, the United States, the transnational oligarchy is going to use the United States military and their economy to create a shortage, a global energy shortage, and then to create a global energy monopoly, controlled by the United States, and then to weaponize that monopoly and that manufactured shortage against their rivals, namely China, which is the primary. The U.S. calls it their peer rival, their only peer rival. And so all of this is being done in the context, according to Richard and myself and maybe Greg, to weaken China's economy and threaten them, have a legitimate threat that, hey, you need to comply, you need to do what we say, or we will, utilize this leverage against you, and you're not going to want that. So that's really what Trump wants to do, going into his meeting in May 14th, which, may or may not happen depending on how Iran goes. Anyway, so I think I want to present, Greg has given us some context, some facts, some data about U.S. oil flow. So 2025. So Greg, could I ask you to just share what the relevance is of this data that you've compiled for us?
Yeah, it's a bit of a counter to the idea that the U.S. is in a position to monopolize and squeeze right now. And we're also vulnerable to the same forces. So we use 20, just to run through it quickly, we use 20 million barrels per day. We produce 13 million of crude and 20 million of total petroleum products after refining. So because our refineries are built decades ago for what we used to have here, which was imports from the Middle East, Canada, Venezuela, Mexico, it's a heavier type of crude than what we produce here. So we still have to import between 6 and 8 million barrels per day of heavy crude to make our refineries work. So we export 4 million barrels of light crude, which we cannot process here because we don't have the refinery capacity. And then we export 6 million barrels of refined petroleum products a day. So we are a net exporter, but that also is based on having to import upwards of 7 million per day. So that's why our prices will be going much higher along with as the shortage bites here too. And then
And it might
we don't
explain.
have excess capacity to fill much of the demand in the world for either oil or natural gas.
But it might explain why we wanted to take over Venezuela, because they have the kind of heavy crude that, you know, our refineries have been developed to, you know, produce petroleum products from. But yeah, so that's interesting. Now, it doesn't take into account our access to Canadian or Mexican or, like I just said, Venezuelan oil. But
that's the bulk of the imports, yeah.
Yeah, and we do not get a lot from the Middle East.
I think only 250,000 barrels per day right now. Something like that.
Yeah, and that's what Trump is always saying. You know, we don't even need the Strait of Hormuz, and so you know, it's really being used more for Japan, South Korea, Europe, and China. So Ian has written on his blog promo kind of to today's program, and he discussed his take on the Medhurst video. So I'm pretty much sold on the idea that this is, you know, what the United States hopes to achieve. In, you know, again, really just, you know, manufacturing a global a decrease in the global energy supply, and then monopolizing the scarcity that remains. And so I think they're interested in taking all of the oil production capacity in the Middle East offline in a big war, which I think will happen maybe this week. I mean, it looks like it's going to happen this week. Of course, it looked like it was going to happen 2 weeks ago as well. So, you know, we could be catastrophizing. You know, it's speculation, but I definitely think it's highly possible and maybe probable that there will be a major bombing campaign very soon, and you know, with Iran retaliation, and that would just probably signal the end of West Asian oil energy production, but maybe not. So Ian, so back to Ian's take. So Ian, you definitely are an anti-imperialist. We share a disdain for imperialism and Western imperialism, and I think you've kind of articulated a frustration with China's response, and you, like a lot of frustrated anti-imperialists who want the U.S. to get their comeuppance, you know, they want someone to teach the United States that you just can't be going around and doing all this evil shit with impunity. You know, we're frustrated that a strong power like China is not doing more. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Other than that, I want to let you articulate your own thoughts and perspective on it, so we can debate.
Yes. So, and guys, also that link, it has my article, but it also has the original video that we are discussing and critiquing. So I also don't want any of us to accidentally create the impression that we're putting words in Richard Medhurst's mouth. So you can go, and I encourage people to do that, go and actually look at the video for yourselves afterwards. For my position, I'll elaborate a bit on what I said in the article. So it's actually, I'm glad Greg came in. We hadn't talked before the show, so I'm glad Greg took it upon himself to show that data, which in general, from what I'd looked up before the show, is basically in agreement with what Greg said, because it's a big MAGA talking point. It's also just a MAGA, like when, because you have these, Trump to the bitter end, people who try to retroactively cope with stuff that he does, even if it's the opposite of what he campaigned on. And one of those MAGA talking points is that, it's cornering the oil market. All these tankers are rushing to the USA, to U.S. ports and terminals because there's no other options now. So they are embracing Medhurst's piracy argument, so I don't blame Medhurst for saying, because he directly said that in his video, that it's a pirate. USA is becoming a pirate state. And unfortunately, MAGA is kind of confirming that. They're very happy. Like, oh, look at this cap. We're basically forcing people to buy American oil at very exuberant spot prices. But other people critiqued that statement, saying, it's kind of nonsense. It's kind of, it's exaggerating. The U.S. oil markets benefit from that is, it's not, there is a benefit, but it's not nearly to the extent that they're claiming, that the pro-Trump guys are claiming. And I think also the anti-imperialist crowd, the multipolar crowd, picked up on that talking point also. And I think that, and that's actually not the first time that's happened. So even opposite ends of the spectrum will sometime, even if they vehemently disagree with each other and have opposite conclusions, but they agree on the same data points as fact. And it's not necessarily true. It is kind of, it is possible to feed off of each other's wrong information. And it does happen. I think that is a case of that happening. We took it at point blank. Oh, it's the U.S. is cornering the market. Well, it's not exactly true. My other thing I wanted to add is that also his emphasis on destruction infrastructure, or Daryl mentioned here, the Indian mega refinery having a fire. So I have 2 points on that. One, when these things happen in the news, especially the alternative media, we do need some context and perspective. So I remember a couple of years ago, this was I think 2022, there were these food, like people are talking about, they're reducing our food supply. The elites are attacking our food supply. Can they point to these accidents that happen, or the avian bird flu that had to cull all the chickens? Whenever something like that happens, and that's actually the problem with even the mainstream news, is that they report this stuff. Oh, here's a fire and here's another fire. But what they don't tell us is what's the normal rate of those things happening. So when I see these news items of, there are a bunch of, which Medhurst pointed out, there are a bunch of refinery fires. Well, what's the in any given year, how many refinery fires just happen on their own? If it was, then they could give a hard figure. They could say, well, in 2026, up to this date, it's been refinery fires have been, say 50% higher than the previous years. They could give a hard number like that. Like, maybe there is something going on, but they don't do that. They just point to these isolated data points. Saying,
without properly contextualizing it. Exactly. They're not giving it proper
and
contextualization.
So I'm not saying they're wrong, but I do want that and I unfortunately don't have the, in that particular industry, I don't have the know-how to really, or the time to really go in myself and research that, but I would like someone to do that before repeating it, because it is an isolated data point without enough context. Not to say it's automatically wrong, but we lack the context. So that's my take on that. And also I'm more in line with what Greg said, both on this show and the previous show, that the U.S. market is more vulnerable to these market forces than China is, which China has a very large reserve of oil, which they beefed up, which Medhurst mentioned. They did pay those American spot prices, and they did beef up reserves. But the U.S. market is more vulnerable. Also, when you export your refined oil, your gasoline, that drives the domestic prices up. Like Russia recently for spring, they actually ended gasoline exports. And a lot of people, it's interesting, a lot of people, that's
Right.
another example of an isolated data point. People are like, oh, they did that because of the Iran thing. It actually has nothing to do with the Iran thing. They do this every year because it's spring. The farmers need the fuel, and they don't stop oil exports. By the way, the unrefined oil is still exported. It's the refined product that they keep to keep domestic prices down for the farmers. And the problem is, so it's kind of like, so if you apply that to the U.S., well, okay, they could take advantage of this, this global shortage, but that drives domestic prices up. Or they could say, well, we're not going to export. We're not going to export. Which by the way, the U.S. does have the power to do. They have cuts. Like Biden did that. He cut LNG exports, which was really funny because they promised Europe LNG, and then like a month after that, cut off LNG exports to Europe. But you can't take advantage of the global prices without raising your own domestic prices. That's the problem. My last point. I'm sorry, I've gone on for a while, but my last point on this part of the topic is that people tend to treat these accidents and these attacks as permanent destruction of the infrastructure, which isn't true. I mean, Medhurst's video specifically mentioned Qatar, which I wouldn't say that's implausible. There's some sort of scheme about Qatar, because we sort of had a soft like Qatar gate in the news, like they were accusing Tucker Carlson and some of these other conservative figures. Oh, you're working for Qatar, the great mega superpower, global power of Qatar. Kind of hilarious when you think about it. But I was like, okay, well, I can see they want to edge Qatar, which by the way, Qatar is a U.S. ally. They have U.S. bases. They are officially a U.S. ally. It's like that Kissinger quote, there's, to be an enemy is dangerous, but to be an ally is fatal. But that
U.S.
said,
owned, U.S. Companies owned like half that big plant that was hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other problem is that it's just not, these things aren't permanent. It's very unlikely for them to be permanent. We talked about this with the Russian refinery hits. Most of the time it burns for a few days, they put it out, then a week or so later it's back up and running. It's usually not destroyed. The headlines are just like, oh, it's destroyed, and they show the big dramatic photo of the refinery or the storage facility burning, but really it's just one reservoir in a field of reservoirs that caught fire and was destroyed. But the facility itself is like, okay, you blew up one tank out of hundreds. What did that do? Nothing. I mean, it's annoying for the people who worked there, I'm sure, to have to clean that up, but it doesn't, by any stretch of the imagination. I would say though, the risk of demand destruction is much greater than any benefit, because if there's demand destruction, what we mean by demand destruction is if like companies that use fuel actually collapse, just go bust because it's too expensive, that means that demand is just destroyed. So even if you reopen the strait and put all the prices back to normal, the demand does not return, at least not right away, because you actually literally destroyed its demand destruction. So that's my main points on that. I mean, we can segue. I mean, there's more, like Billy Bob was referencing, specifically the China side of it, but that's my take, at least on the data that Medhurst presented in his video.
Yeah, Medhurst isn't so focused on China per se, but on the U.S. monopoly, piracy, profiteering angle.
Yeah. So, and again, I mean, I'm persuaded that he's probably correct in, what the plan is my suspicion, right? And so, and I like to contextualize that within the greater paradigm of, what is going on. And so again, I mean, I always want to look at everything from the macro analysis level, the macro analytical level, and basically, it's, Western imperialism is in decline. They're feeling threatened by these rising sovereign powers that they don't control. They're feeling displaced. And so, they've developed a comprehensive strategy to deal with those threats. And my assertion is that part of that is, has always been wanting to either, conquer Iran's energy, or if you can't conquer their energy and control it like you control the energy in the Gulf states, then you'll just burn everything down. And I think Iran has resisted, and they've let the United States know that, hey, you're going to have to just burn everything down. And so I think the United States is willing to burn everything down in the Middle East, to achieve this energy monopoly that, again, they're going to be using to weaponize against China. And this is the whole point of everything, right? Like, if China wasn't a peer competitor, there would be none of this would be going on, so this is the explanation for, everything that we see happening from Venezuela to even Ukraine, right? I mean, and just like Syria, was a gateway to Iran, what we're doing with Russia is a gateway and a necessary step towards China. And the pursuit of total global hegemony for the Western imperialists. I mean, that is the bottom line of what they are after. That's what this is about. And so what I like about Medhurst is it's a quick half hour. Go to Ian's blog. It's a quick half hour focus, talking about the actual strategy. So what's more important to me than the actual strategy, which I think is accurate, is to contextualize that strategy in the bigger picture. And then from there, we can extrapolate and predict what might be happening. And so I think events have been, going exactly as I've been predicting for quite some time now. And we see, a war with Iran that has not happened for 47 years. And we can ask ourselves why. And there's different explanations for that. A lot of people point to Israeli control of the United States government, or they just focus on Iran by itself without, thinking bigger picture, which I think is China. But so let's talk about, one fun disagreement which we have here is the idea of, China's response to all of this. But I'm not sure if it's even necessary to go to China's response to all this if we don't have a fundamental agreement about what all this is. And so maybe I could just let Ian to give a brief summary of how he see what is this? What is happening, and what does he see China seeing? And because I know you have criticisms of China's response to what is happening, but I think we might have a disagreement about what is happening. So I don't know. What can you?
Well, because there's different layers. There's different layers that even, is there movement, and I can address, any one of them. The issue with the grand, which Medhurst did touch on, that that's meant to contain China, that, and there's these different chess pieces, which, happen sequentially. So, they kidnapped Maduro, and then afterwards, Venezuela kind of, to an extent, flip-flopped. And then they moved to Iran, and you can say, okay, well, these are
Russia.
Sequential steps, right? Yes, Russia, the Shadow Fleet, as they call it. My, I guess, hesitancy to accept that is because it's assigning motive, and we don't know motive. We're not mind readers. We don't even know if these are all as connected as everyone thinks. So I do think it's correct that the attack on Iran it wasn't planned in a day. So I think it's very, and even I remember even when Maduro was kidnapped, we were talking on this show that this was likely a segue into Iran, because that's a logical thing to do if you want to attack Iran, is to do something about Venezuela first. But the grand strategy for it is less clear, I think. And I think that's putting it mildly, because especially because especially after the ceasefire, a lot of factions in Washington are distancing themselves from it, because we can say, oh, well, Israel, it's a conspiracy theory to say Israel controls Washington. That might be the case, but most of the other factions have distanced themselves from the Iran war. Like there's the New York Times, there's CNN, like all these big, which is interesting. Even CNN did, because CNN is typically very pro-Israel.
Right, I mean, the whole Congress typically.
Yeah, and they're all kind of, they were really lumping it all on Trump's head. And the New York Times article, which we referenced on this show, it pretty directly said that it was Netanyahu that came, and Trump's own advisors in the Pentagon were against the attack. Now that might not be true. I even said that at the time. They might have been all gung ho. Oh yeah, Iran, Tehran will take Tehran in 3 days. And then after it didn't work, they all distanced themselves because they didn't want to be associated with failure. That might be what happens. But the point is, at this point, if Trump bombs Iran again, he's a lot more alone than the first time he bombed Iran, because everybody's kind of doing their best to distance themselves from the project. Now that said, I will finally answer Billy Bob's this question about my China stance. So in the article, I'll just say I'm not anti-China, but I'm not. I think actually you described it pretty fairly. They've had many opportunities to impress me, but I'm always I'm disappointed. Like even the second in 2022, this after the sanctions happened, I decided I'm going to revisit China, or not. I'm not going to visit China. I was going to revisit Russia. I actually found a Chinese affiliated bank that offered Americans Union Pay cards, and I said, I want to use this in Russia. They basically it was a dead end. They didn't really help me out. And actually, Union Pay mostly also distanced themselves from Russia. And this was unfortunately, just in my personal life, the kind of my ongoing experience with China. When there's Chinese support or Chinese products, it tends to disappear when the U.S. puts pressure on it. So Union Pay kind of disappeared after the U.S. put pressure on it. The allegation, I think it's a grounded allegation because China didn't deny it. Usually when Washington makes a BS allegation, the other side denies it. Like when they make a BS allegation against Russia, they deny it right away. China hasn't, as far as I know, has not denied it. So I think it's true. The Wall Street Journal claimed that it was China that put pressure on Iran to go into a ceasefire. Which was interesting because when the ceasefire happened, I think most of it, I was a little optimistic. I was like, okay, well, that must mean Trump was more painted into a corner than we realized. So this is a good sign. But then a few days after that, Wall Street Journal said, well, actually, it was China that was pressuring Iran to accept the ceasefire because China wants to be on Trump's good graces when I guess he has some summit. I don't remember the details. I'd have to look at the article again, but there's this upcoming summit and they want to be on Trump's good graces for that. And that's kind of my issue. It's like, you can't, I think we assign this motive for like, China's this big, pull in the multipolar order. And, they're a cure for, Western imperialism, they're a logical counterforce against it. Well, I don't think that matches with what China's actual policy has been. I don't think they're even mostly in opposition to it. I think that's the cause, because I posted about this on several other platforms and, other people who, I wasn't alone in that sentiment. A lot of people are frustrated with, because this was actually very gold, not to say Iran should have been used as a proxy or should have been used as cannon fodder. Of course, no one's saying that, but it was a very golden opportunity to basically give Iran the same support Ukraine got, because Ukraine was a couple days into the war. It was they'd apparently suffered several thousand casualties in the first 2 days of the war. They were feeling very discouraged. They were interested in negotiating. Then Boris Johnson did that visit, said, we'll give you all this. And that's very important because people don't tend to keep fighting if they feel it's hopeless. Like there's actually it's a terrible experiment, but these scientists threw lab mice into water and waited for how long it took them to drown. And they found that if you actually rescue the rat right before it drowns, and you put it back in the water, it will last a lot longer because it has this hope that it'll be rescued. So I think when it comes to, not to say people are mice, but if you give a country this assurance that, if you continue this fight to its logical conclusion, you'll have the support to do that. And that's what Ukraine got. So they're still dragging it out more than 4 years later, trying not to drown. It doesn't seem like Iran got those assurances. They might not. I think if Iran had those assurances that, we're going to give you the money, we're going to give you the financial support and the material support you need to fight this war to a logical conclusion, they might not have been. And I don't think it would have even taken very long. And unfortunately, a 2-week ceasefire might make this longer because they have they can't make more Patriot or THAAD missiles in that time, but they can bring in more. They can because once the war starts, you can't ship in more stuff. But now with a ceasefire, they can do that. So yeah, so that's in a nutshell, my take on the.
Okay, so you're saying the last point was that there shouldn't have been a ceasefire. Iran should not have agreed to a ceasefire. It was not in their strategic interest. And China forced Iran into doing something that was against their own.
I wouldn't put it because we don't have enough information. It's like I mentioned, when the ceasefire was first announced, we're like, oh, wow, they must have really painted Trump into a corner, to a greater extent than we even thought, right? Because, it's unusual for there to suddenly be a ceasefire. But and we don't know what when they say pressure, I don't think we even know what do they mean by pressure. We can't exactly be sure. So I don't want to make the statement too concrete because we just don't have the information to even say that. It's not a promising sign. Let's put it that way. I think that's the best way to put it. It's not a promising sign. It's not an encouraging sign. I do think Iran has the means if it goes back into a hot war. I think Iran has the means, even in the absence of outside help, they do have the means to hold their own. But we can't give China credit for this. That's my 2 cents on that.
What was the last thing you just said? I was clearing my throat.
Well, we can't. I think Iran has the means to win the war on their own.
No, I heard that, and then you said one last thing.
But we can't give credit to. I think there's a push to give China more credit than is due. Like I see, China's giving Iran all this help. Well, there isn't a lot of evidence for that. There isn't. They have their own military industrial complex. They've bought commercial satellite imagery from both Chinese and Russian companies. There's not a lot of material. I know, and actually, the USA has made the allegations, actually specifically Russia is helping them, but I don't see a lot of material evidence for any of those assertions.
Okay. Do you draw any implications from that, or are you just pointing it out? Like, what does that mean in the greater context?
Well, if we're going to paint it as one of Medhurst's statements in that video is that, it's this big, great game between the U.S. and China and its allies. A game needs 2 players, right? I don't see evidence that China is playing this game, because if they were playing this game, then they could have definitely been a lot more forceful than they were.
Okay. So no, a lot of points, and I should have stopped you after the first one about Trump because it's what we need to discuss, and I think there's a lot that needs to be said about that. So when we go back to the Trump issue, what was his? Oh yeah. So everybody's distancing themselves from Trump, right? But they're only doing it in a theatrical way and not in any kind of a decisive way, right? So there was a vote in the Congress to authorize
the War Powers Act, yes.
Yeah, the War Powers, and it was like they got one Democrat to vote with the Republicans, and then they voted to not force Trump to declare to go to Congress before attacking Iran again. Was the gist of it, and so this is entirely unsurprising. And it demonstrates precisely what I've always been saying, is that Trump is the ideal candidate to do all these things, and they're going to facilitate him doing these things. And then they're going to try and distance themselves from him and pretend like, hey, it was Trump that plunged the global economy into depression and we opposed it. They can say that with a straight face because people are dumb. And it's just ridiculous. All right, go ahead.
I want to stop you there. I mean, because it's with the War Powers, it's a bit more complicated than that. And it's not necessarily proof that they're working, hand in hand, though they are to an extent. It's the problem we have with especially with the president's ability to wage war, is that the party in power, and right now Republicans have a slight edge still. So they're the party in power. They have the majority. They don't want their guy to lose the power to do that. And they can even get a couple Democrats, because, if there's 50 people in the room, you can get somebody to agree with, basically any statement you make. So, so they got Republicans. The Republicans don't want to lose that power. Now, the issue is that when you get a Democrat back in office...
So you're just speaking in a vacuum?
No, because, well, let me finish. When Democrats get in power, when they have a majority, they won't want to do it either because they want their guy. The Democrats, with their majority, could have easily fixed that loophole where the president could basically just go to war, do whatever he wants. They could have fixed that when Obama was president or when Biden was president. They didn't, because they wanted their guy to be able to invade Libya or do whatever the hell he wants. Republicans have the majority, and it's the same thing. They don't want their guy to lose it. So it's a bit more complicated than just saying, oh well, they're fine with Trump going to war. The problem is they're not happy when the other guy does stuff, but they want their guy to be able to do this.
Well, I think that's a liberal view that, discounts the most important reality of that both parties work for the same oligarch class. And so if we understand that both parties work for the same oligarch class, this is how they pursue the interests of the oligarch class while maintaining the pretense of opposition and democracy. Because, again, from the Marxist perspective, this isn't a democracy, it's a capitalist dictatorship. And, they have to pursue the interests of capital while at the same time they pretend to pursue the interests of the American people. So it's a double game. And to me, it's just so obvious how this double game is being played, where, the Democrats give them enough votes to make sure that Trump can go ahead and do what he needs to do while they pretend that they oppose it. So, as I've, predicted 2 years ago, what's going to happen is, Trump's going to do all these things. It's going to be very bad for the economy. And then it's going to allow the ruling establishment to blame Trump specifically and personally. And they can claim that we opposed it. And then they're going to run the Democrats, and then the Democrats will pursue, they'll take over the reins and they'll run things exactly just the way Trump did after Biden, the exact same way Biden did after Trump, and the exact same way that Trump did after Obama. It's one foreign policy, and it's to pursue full spectrum dominance, total global hegemony for the Western imperialist class. That's just what's going on, and you can see how it is entirely predictable and transparently bullshitty that the Democrats let one of their people vote, so this resolution exactly as predicted, exactly as expected. But anyway, so that's my point. That was what I want. That was my response to your idea that a lot of factions oppose Trump. Yes, they oppose Trump with words only, and that opposition is not substantial. They are greasing the skids for the global economic collapse that could happen in a day. But So
Can I
we're
jump
gonna-
in?
What,
I want
Yes,
to
okay.
put it a little, let me reframe it a little bit. Both parties support destroying Iran. I don't know that there was consensus going to war right now was the right thing to do.
With Iran, you mean another bombing campaign with Iran, as
I
opposed
mean, the
to
whole war, taking it to a hot war.
Well, okay. I mean,
I
you're
mean,
entitled
there's science planning was underway during Biden, but we also know he vetoed the idea of launching an actual war,
Yeah, that wouldn't have
along
worked
with
well for
every other
them
president.
because,
What?
again, I think there's a coherent strategy of getting Trump to do it and then blaming Trump for everything and then, running behind him and continuing without being tainted by everything bad that Trump did. That's the whole point of this charade. It's the charade. But
that's not impossible. I mean, it's not impossible. That's what they're doing. I mean, I think there's I mean, Daryl and Cowley in the comments agrees with you. By
yeah,
the way.
well, I have a Nazi getting my back. Thanks, Daryl.
Oh my
I'm
God.
just kidding, Daryl. Give you a hard time, Daryl. We're gonna meet up with Aaron Good. I think on the 27th. Aaron Good said he can join us for a discussion, but I'll get in touch with you about that. So don't take offense at me calling you a Nazi. Just embrace it.
But what was I gonna say?
I'm not done.
Okay, so,
I'm not
so
done,
the,
Ian. But
the issue is that the material reality is what can Trump do? Because I don't see short of nuclear weapons, which I think which becomes a bigger issue because you're actually risking World War III. Because people can't just sit there and let the U.S. just nuke who they don't like. But what's Trump materially going to do against Iran? I mean, you can bomb them again. Well, they'll bomb the U.S. Middle East, Middle East infrastructure again, and it's just like it's out. Why would it go better?
That's a question.
Billy thinks that's
Let me address it. I mean, so what I think is happening is there's two things going on. There's the game of perception. Trump doesn't want to own the destruction of Middle East oil. He wants to blame Iran for breaking the agreement and causing it themselves. And so that's why there's some delays going on. And that's why ultimately the entire plan is to either conquer Iran's oil supply. And in lieu of being able to do that, which they can't, they're just going to take all of Middle Eastern oil offline. This is the plan that Medhurst discussed that I've been, yelling with my hair on fire for a couple of years now. And I'm really, invested emotionally because I see it happening right before our eyes. But the plan is, again, to Trump doesn't want to take blame. He wants to pretend that Iran is being intransigent, that Iran had all these agreements. Iran has promised to do this. Iran has promised. And then Iran broke their promises, leaving poor Donald Trump with no choice. And this is really hitting a high fever pitch in the media right now. You see Netanyahu saying, hey, what we're going to do in a couple hours is because Iran's trying to Holocaust us again. This is what Netanyahu said this morning. Iran wants to Holocaust us with nuclear weapons, and that is why we have to do what we're about to do. So it's all about perception. It's all about blaming Iran for the destruction that they have planned on doing and understood a long time ago that is probably necessary. For why? It's necessary to perpetuate, to further this strategy of total global hegemony for the Western imperialists, namely weakening Iran, Russia, and China especially. And so this is all, a necessary stepping stones towards implementing their strategy to do an energy embargo of China, to refuse to allow China to export their manufactured goods using the waterway of the South China Sea, which is their economic lifeline. So this is all a necessary precursor to that, but we've seen delays and we're seeing it now. The timing matters, and there's explanations for the timing. So the delay from 2 weeks ago is more PR to justify what's going on and to blame Iran for being a Holocaust threat to the globe, to humanity that has to be dealt with.
Sorry, my connectivity cut out.
So I don't know if I cut out or if Ian cut out or what happened, but and then I was going to address.
in
ahead,
this
go ahead.
article, hopefully you can hear a chart about China's energy use, which also calls into question how much of this can affect China, which I was surprised to see how little they're using fossil fuels for power generation. Well, aside from coal, which they have.
Well, again, and Greg, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Did we lose Billy Bob? Is that what happens?
Well, I
we're all
thought I
good
was here.
now.
Oh, we're all good. Okay, I can't see Billy Bob for some reason.
It's probably your internet. I mean, I've
Oh
been
yeah,
able to
it's
see everybody
my.
the whole time.
Okay, good. And I apologize, guys. So sometimes, and I don't know why, for some reason in Crimea, sometimes my connection to the StreamYard service we're using gets screwed. So I apologize for that. My main objection to that is that destruction. I mean, what I mean, and I repeat my question. What's Trump? I mean, do you think they're going to use nukes? I mean, it's not impossible, but if they don't use nukes, then there's really nothing they can permanently destroy. I mean, they can bomb some stuff, and that will, screw up the global economy. It'll probably cause a recession. It'll probably do terrible things to people and people's livelihoods around the world. But it's not permanent. In 6 months to a year, things will be back to where basically the way they were. It'll be for nothing. What's it?
Well, hold on. Okay, can I address that? So there's a few problems with that, Ian, and you're contradicting yourself a little bit because number one, you're talking about once the demand collapses, the demand's going to take years to come back. And also, I would just argue on a factual basis, every expert that I've listened to says that the West has the ability to take offline Iran's energy production very quickly, very easily, and set it back for years. It would take years before Iran is able to extract energy and export it to the point that they are today. So that might be not true, but you already said earlier that it's demand is the problem.
I made the point about demand destruction, which is bad for the global economy, but there's nothing that, I mean, what magic weapons is the U.S. going to use that would permanently destroy? And I brought this up on this show before. We've seen Russia and Ukraine bombing the shit out of each other. And most of these targets.
Ukraine's not an energy exporter. Ukraine is not exporting energy. They don't have a very vulnerable
factories. You hit them with
economy
bombs.
Based on
you get people to fix it. They patch the roof. They replace whatever machines were broken, and then it's back online again a couple days later. I mean,
Ian, everyone's saying Qatar's destruction is going to take 5 years to repair. You think that's exaggerated?
I don't know. Because unfortunately I don't know what I haven't actually heard the 5-year claim, so I can't properly.
Yeah, I just defer to the experts, and every expert I've listened to said that this is easily doable. The United States can easily set Iran back 5 years, and remember that's 5 years from the end of hostilities, right? And then it's also, doesn't take into account the ability of the United States to interdict seaborne, oil imports going to China. So the bottom line is I'm thinking that they're going to just destroy all the oil production. But even if they don't, and some residual oil production capacity remains in Iran, they're still not going to be able to send it to China, And so this is the point. But I would.
China gets more oil from the other Gulf states.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. I mean, that's a good point. That's a good point. So they could, I mean, the issue here is, in Greg's chart at the beginning of the show, this affects Western countries and those global South countries aligned with Western countries, like the Philippines, Vietnam, which is more aligned with, which is kind of amazing when you think about Vietnam being more aligned with the USA than with China, but it is. So I could be wrong. I don't know how, it could, they could hypothetically bomb Iran enough that it sets them back 5 years. And then they bomb the Gulf states, so they're set back 5 years. I don't see, and Richard's Medhurst's video makes this assertion as about cornering China, but it doesn't make sense if it hurts us more than it hurts China, and it's also making a lot of other assumptions too. Like he mentions the Shadow Fleet. I love that. It sounds so evil. It's like the Death Star. The Shadow Fleet being interdicted. Well, after he's made that video, they've started escorting the ships. And that amazingly, that miraculously stops the attacks.
Russia has.
Ships. Right. Russia has started, they haven't, there's just been one case of it so far, but they put a frigate through the English Channel. They magically didn't want to attack the Shadow Fleet ships anymore.
Right. So to do with the Cuban shipment too.
Right. Same thing with the Cuban shipment. They let the Cuban shipments through. So, and also, as Medhurst says, that Russia is still the majority, the largest supplier. I think his figures he cited with Iran was 5%, and what was the second country he said was 4%? Was it Qatar? It was Venezuela, I think. But anyway, so these are single digit suppliers. So it's like, okay, you took out these single digit suppliers. Well, I don't know. It's a weak plan. If it's a plan, it's not a very good one. I think.
Well, they don't. I argue that the West doesn't have good options, but this is the option they're going with. And the reason why they're going with this option is because China is maybe 5 years away from total energy independence and not relying on any imported energy from the Middle East. And so they're working on nuclear. They're working on firing up coal plants. And there's a very narrow window of opportunity that the United States has identified. And this is, again, the impetus for the timing that we're seeing. So, I think if you are able to do an embargo against China, no energy imports going into it, even though those energy imports only, are like 20%, right, of their economy and 80% is domestically produced, that's significant. And then if you can further keep China from exporting their manufactured goods through the South China Sea, I mean, the United States hopes that they can do significant and serious damage to China's economy. And they hope that, they will emerge on the other side of this huge World War III kind of, conflagration, maybe involving another proxy war against China, right? You're weaponizing Japan against China. You're weaponizing Taiwan against China. You're weaponizing the Philippines against China. You can launch another proxy war that you hope you can contain. And so, I think, again, I always argue that we're at the very beginning of this unfolding, right? Like, I mean, we're seeing it step by step by step. And the biggest pieces of this strategy have not yet been enacted. They have not directly focused their attention to China and implemented their strategy against China directly to, really go straight at China. We're doing the necessary steps before they do that. And so there's a lot of, this is predictive analysis. I am predicting based on a framework, based on an understanding about the West's motivations. And so, and I think it's important that that we share and get people on board with what this framework is and the motivations of why it's happening. So people aren't able to get confused and start to blame Iran for all of this, or they blame Netanyahu for all of this. Like, those are just dumb things that people are liable to do because they listen to people that don't know what the fuck is going on. But it looks like Ian has been staring at me, not blinking for several minutes. Okay, there we go.
Or he froze. Yeah.
I did freeze for a second. Yeah.
So I don't know where this conversation should best go. I mean, again, I like contextualizing everything, advancing this predictive framework, telling people this is going to happen. It might happen in the next few hours. A significant movement in this direction could very well happen in the next few hours, which is a massive bombing of Iran, destroying their capacity. And so I predicted this 2 weeks ago too, when Trump, said, I'm going to destroy the civilization of Iran tonight. I thought we were there. And I was wrong. And so I could very well be wrong today. And they could be pushing this out for who knows how long, weeks, months. But the bottom line is there's a narrow window of opportunity that is rapidly closing. They have all these forces in place right now. Mohammed Morandi, like I said this morning, urged everybody in the Gulf monarchies to evacuate immediately because, you know, shit is about to go down. So given all of that, you know, I'm just thinking that it's more likely than not that, you know, within the next day or two, we're going to see a significant escalation in this, you know, this strategy that we're laying out, that Medhurst helped to lay out. And, you know, it's not even going to be decisive because it's not a pivot to China. It's just dealing with the issue that needs to be dealt with before they do this real decisive pivot to China. And at that point, nobody is going to be able to say it's not about China. And I mean, and that just has yet to happen. You know, you have to just kind of see it in the framing that I'm offering. You can predict it, but you don't really see it, right? You just have to understand that this is what's coming. Anyway, a feedback. Who is incensed to dispute what I'm saying?
Well, we can go to the most we can go to the most incendiary with criticism of China if he wants to.
Okay.
Which is in. Okay, so guys, so I am going to share the screen. So I had posted about Iran to my Quora page. And guys, so if you go to the link, you'll also see Billy Bob's, I shared one of his long form comments here, which you can read.
Oh, it's a good one.
Mostly yes. And so I want to share a comment somebody had left on one of my pages, which I'll just read real quick. It's another kind of anti-imperialist person who is actually even more critical than me of China's response to this. So, and he addresses the oil argument to begin with, and he also shared the graphic that Greg mentioned. Oil and LNG make up liquefied natural gas make up a minority of China's energy requirements, which they've already been stockpiling for years anyway. The oil argument is a nonsensical one, especially when they can bypass the Gulf states and get Iranian oil while the rest of the world, besides Russia, suffers from an oil crisis. Here's a graph of Chinese energy capacity from last year. And let's be real. You don't sell equipment to Iran, form an alternative finance system, and engage in joint exercises only to turn around and say, actually, we're not allies. They are allies in the geopolitical sense. If anything, the U.S. has it worse, considering gas is the leading source of American electricity production at 37% in 2025. Fact of the matter is, Beijing is led by cucks. That's his word. There's absolute zero downside to the Iranian war that China has that it can't bypass, or the U.S. has worse. It gets worse the more you think about it. China could have, one, destroyed the petrodollar by aiding Iran financially and moving to secure some kind of oil deal. Something to take advantage of the fact that Iran was the only one who could sell their oil through Hormuz, while everyone else was oil starved. And as a bonus, it boosts Russia, which China needs if it wants to beat the Western sphere. Two, strength and coordination with Russia and Iran, military intel, coordinated strategy, etc. Embargo America, the USA, or establish some kind of economic retaliation. More rare earth minerals restrictions, sanctions. They are competing for the superpower spot, after all. And four, invade Taiwan, or at least pressure American bases and allies to stretch Pacific Command thin. And finally, five, establish itself as a viable alternative to the Epstein world order. It did none of this stuff that would be a no-brainer for anyone else. China is essentially not the real protagonist at this point, given how thoroughly they want to sit in the cuck chair. So that's the end of the quote. I want to hear Billy Bob's rebuttal of that. I'm going to stop sharing screen.
Yeah, I definitely would like to. Greg, do you want to get in word in edgewise, or are you good with me grandstanding for another long time? Okay. Yeah, so the idea that this person is in a better situation to correctly understand what is in China's interest and what China's strategy is. It's just, I mean, to me, it's just colossally arrogant that any dumb motherfucker is gonna fucking take Takora and presume to know better than the Communist Party of China, who is responsible for the well-being of 1.4 billion people and has advanced that well-being on a trajectory that's unprecedented in all of human history, that he's going to know better how China responds, how China ought to respond to what is going on. So I just think that's laughable. I think he's a fucking idiot for presuming to fucking that he knows fucking anything. Like, that's number one. And I'm sorry to be rude, to some dumb shit. But and again, like, I think that I understand China's approach, and I think I understand China's strategy, and I agree that China's approach and strategy is the best. Like, they are doing things correctly. And if they were to follow the advice of idiots like that, so that they could prove to everybody we're really anti-imperialists. Thank God China doesn't predicate their strategy on proving their anti-imperialist bona fides to idiot fucking Western leftists. And he might not even be a leftist. Because there's anti-imperialists, on the right wing, the libertarians, those dumb shits. Sorry.
I don't know.
And on the left wing. So to me, it's just preposterous. It's laughable. And like it I'm gonna do my best to illustrate and elaborate why. But just before I did that, I wanted to just say how stupid this person is to presume that his strategy ought to be followed by this. And if only he could get Xi on the phone, he could let Xi know, hey, stop being a cuck, Xi. Stop being a weak, spineless loser and fucking do what I'm saying to do. Because what I'm saying to do is going to be better for humanity. Shut the fuck up. Sorry. Okay. So anyway, thanks for letting me do that. Basically, so a defense of what China is doing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So China, number one, has time on its side, right? So China is winning. They can sit back and they can watch the Western Empire decline and overextend itself. And the longer that happens, the better it is for humanity. Okay. So, but they're also going to reciprocate, right? When China is directly attacked through like the sanctions that we saw last year that Trump was trying to do. Remember, what was the day? Liberation Day. He enacted all these things that the Supreme Court subsequently said were illegal, and now he's got to pay back all those tariffs. China just stopped him in his tracks, and it was an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment for Trump. China made him look stupid because he is. The West stupid. China has won this battle 10 years ago, if not more. And so it makes no sense for them to cede the battlefield to the to where it's most advantageous to the West, to get into military adventurism, to get into unnecessary escalation with the United States, who has 800 military bases around the world. China has 1 or 2. They have 11 carrier groups. China has 3. The United States has some 30-something submarines. China is just rolling out there. So it makes no sense to for China to get into a hot war and to get escalatory just to prove to stupid fucking Western idiots that, oh, no, China really is good. Like, that's not how they define their strategy.
Why not embargo the USA? I mean, the USA is not shy about embargoing people who attack.
Okay, China is.
Well, China's.
I was going to say China has trade relations with the United States, important trade relations, and also with Europe, right? And these things are important, and they would jeopardize those far more important things by doing some silly, unstrategic, escalatory adventurism that itself is going to have a whole bunch of unpredictable outcomes. What we can predict right now is that China can do nothing and win. And then these idiots are saying, oh, no, China needs to do something so they can maybe not win. I don't know.
Well, we know their strategies. I mean, their overarching strategy since Deng is hide strength, bide time, right? So their goal is to catch up to Western development levels. So they don't want wars, trade wars, anything until they're at that level.
But if it gets forced upon them, I mean, they're going to respond.
Right,
But
when it's direct, exactly.
Yeah. And so they're managing the situation. And again, I've made this argument constantly. You know, Putin and Xi understand that they have to manage the decline of Western imperialism with the least amount of economic catastrophe and, you know, nuclear fallout as possible. And so that's what they're both trying to do. And I mean, we can see that the West continues to push and to escalate. And so again, we're going to see how this plays out. And China could very soon you know, take a more significant response, especially if, you know, the United States starts to really go after these Iranian ships that are going towards China. So this is like, you know, I'm not going to predict what China's going to do, but I'm definitely going to trust China to know what their best interest is. And I also understand their ideology. And I understand their perception of the world. And I think they share the perception I kind of laid out here. And they're defending against it in the best way possible, in my opinion.
And we also, you know, if there's anything to the story that China was able to get Iran to take the ceasefire, that assumes there's some support going on behind the scenes, to me. Because why would they have leverage?
Yeah, and again, I don't think we know enough about the support that China's giving Iran. We don't know enough about the allegation that China forced Iran to have a ceasefire. Like these are claims I totally dismiss. I don't even let them enter into my analysis because they're so, who knows? Like nobody knows what is going on. And so, you know, you got to have your analysis, you know, predicated on the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are, you know, China has won, and they just need to, you know, the longer this goes on, the better for China.
Why is it escalation to say we're not going to sell rare earth minerals to build weapons to kill our allies? Why is that?
Well, I think China has done that, right?
It's not by normal logic.
Well, I mean,
but the U.S. would. The U.S. gets very reactive.
I just don't think it would be unreasonable.
No, I think China stops exporting a lot of rare earths to the United States.
My point is, why not just embargo everything? Well, why? I mean, they're continuing to trade, and you say, well, it's an escalation to stop trading with the USA. Well, why is it an escalation to not trade with the U.S. while they're bombing the shit out of Iran?
So you want China to embargo the United States, and you say that's not going to be escalatory?
It's not unfair if you're an ally to expect your other allies. I mean, they're in BRICS. I mean, I don't know what BRICS is good for if they don't even stop trading with their enemies when they're being bombed. And I will point out we had the same issue with Ukraine. China, well, to this day, China does not recognize Crimea. By the way, I'll just point that out there. They continued to trade, including dual purpose material, to Ukraine, and they did not stop. What made them stop selling to Ukraine was when Trump started negotiating with Russia, because they were scared. They were scared shitless that the U.S. and Russia were going to line against them. That was the fear of the U.S. of being the odd man out in that three that made China stop selling weapons to Ukraine. So I'm sorry, I don't think.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting narrative, Ian, but I totally reject it. Like I think it's preposterous.
How is it preposterous? I can
well, because number one, I don't think China. I think Putin and Xi have a very tight understanding, and they share an understanding of what's going on, and they understand the history of the Sino-Soviet split. They understand that, you know, there's they're neighbors, and that they share a big border, and they're smart enough, and they're adult enough to not, you know, think like an idiot. So I mean, I'm totally confident that there was no concern whatsoever from Xi that, you know, Russia under Putin was going to throw China under the bus. Like I have 1,000% certainty that was never a worry in Xi's mind. But
you
I
could
mean,
have stopped selling earlier. I can come to Moscow.
yeah, no, it's been an ongoing thing, and it's not sales from Chinese state industries. There have been private sales, and they go through third parties, and it's very hard to stop.
It's companies. Is it communist or is it capitalist?
What are you wanting to change the subject to this? I mean, that's we can, and believe me.
Well, it doesn't even matter. Any state can restrict weapons exports, and they do, including China regulates it. The U.S. does.
Yeah, and again, they're alleged dual use, and I'm sure they're getting components for drones. I mean, I don't dispute or deny that that's going on. I just don't think it means what Ian thinks it means, and I don't think it's that significant at all.
Okay, well, here's a question. What has China done specifically? That's from one of our comments. I think that's a good question.
So number one, China doubled their imports of Russian goods, and so they might have doubled their exports of Chinese goods to Russia. So they ultimately sustained Russia's economy throughout the entirety of the SMO. So honestly, that's a hell of a lot. And of course, it's in China's interest to do so. But if China didn't do that, Russia would not be okay as okay as they are. And so I think just bankrolling and providing a solid foundation for the Russian economy by doing that, it just shows that they are inseparable. And they are in lockstep in their resistance to Western imperialism. And they understand that the West is trying to destroy them. And as long as that continues, they know that they're stronger together. And that's just the obvious reality. So, what else has China done besides just?
It's true, China and India were very happy to buy Russian oil at a very steep, almost at cost discount. I would think an ally.
Yeah, was Russia happy to sell it?
Well, Russia didn't really have a choice, did they? They were.
What do you mean? Did China have a choice? China had a choice. They didn't have to buy Russian energy.
More
I don't know. I mean, I think Russia was more than happy once their export market in Europe was overthrown.
5 minutes ago, we were like, oh, well, cutting off oil imports to China is meant to put pressure on China. And now you're saying, well, they could have chosen to not buy Russian oil. Well, okay. I do think one of these days
China could have chosen to side with the United States against Russia, and China did not do that. China chose to side with Russia against the United States.
Against Russia all the time. What are you talking about? All the time. Every time the U.S. threatens to sanction China, they fold like a paper bag. There's no union pay because they fold it. When a Chinese institution is trading with Russia, the U.S. Treasury says, hey, stop that or we will sanction you. They back down 100%, not even one exception, not even one single exception of China not backing down when the U.S. threatens them with sanctions.
So your geopolitical analysis is that it's the United States and China and Europe against Russia, and Russia is all alone. So, and I just think I think that's preposterous. I think that's silly.
How is that preposterous? So when has China not backed down against sanctions? Can you give me one example?
Well,
Iran. I mean, what China does is they move it over into, like gray market. They have those private refineries who they, who get in trouble where the state-owned stuff avoids it. The teapot refineries
India does
are
the same
sanctioned
thing.
and stuff.
India does the same thing, but I don't see on the show that India is, a global power. That India is the pole of the world. I mean, what makes China stronger than India at this point? I mean, because
their economy
I
is
mean, I
about
would
6
say
times
that,
as bigger.
the only anti-imperialist power right now on the planet is actually Iran. They're the only ones who actually sacrifice blood and treasure unselfishly to help other countries. It's not China or Russia right now, unfortunately.
Well,
do
I don't
think,
know
well, I
what the
will say
point
it's a
of
good.
that kind of analysis is. I mean, what are you casting aspersions at Russia and China and saying that, they
No, the
should be doing something
Soviet
differently? Because that's
Union.
the implication. The
No, it's not
implication
an
is,
aspersion. I'm saying that the Soviet Union and how Iran are very unusual historically. So, I mean, the standard we're holding them to is not something that's regularly occurring over time in history.
the
I
standard
will
that
say
we're
what's
holding
happening.
We're
them
holding
to.
China to here.
Well, with Iran,
I don't think
will
I don't
say-
think it's right to say they're aligned with the US, but their level of rebellion or resistance is limited by what, will cause retaliation or confrontation with the US, which they don't want.
Right, and I argue that that's the appropriate best strategy to win, right? And
Right.
to see the defeat of Western imperialism, because you're not playing to the strengths of your opponent, and
Yeah, no, it's arguably a smart strategy, but it does mean we can't sit here and say that China is a real anti-imperialist power in the way the Soviet Union was right now.
Well, I mean, that caveat could mean a whole bunch of things, and I'm not sure. An anti-imperialist power is an anti-imperialist power. If you are targeted by the empire for destruction, and you resist your destruction, you're an anti-imperialist power. And so the Soviet Union succumbed, right? They eventually, were targeted and ended up not being a power anymore. The Soviet Union is no longer in existence. And China, is learning from that, and they're hoping to avoid that. And again, I mean, I have 1,000% certainty that China, will and is going to be victorious, and they have already won the victory. And it's just a matter of it playing out. And so the only question remains is, how big of an effort, how big of a futile effort is the West going to use to try and figure out themselves that they're not going to be able to defeat China. And so we're going to see what they want to do, and China's going to respond. But China's not going to escalate. China's not pushing this to happen because they understand they're ultimately the target. But it's just weird. I mean, it's just a totally different understanding of things to hear Ian say that, China has aligned itself with the United States against Russia. It's just upside down and turns everything on its head. And I don't know where, what framework leads to that kind of an understanding, or, what it's predicated on. But I don't think Putin sees things like that at all. I think Putin sees things pretty much how I see things, how I'm explaining things, and I think she does as well. And I think the leadership in Russia, the leadership in Iran, the leadership in China is pretty much on the same place as I am, and as Richard is. I think they understand that there's going to be this effort to monopolize global energy, to weaponize it against China. Like, this is not anything that's hidden. And this is in policy papers. It's been invested in. It's been talked about, not openly for the American public to understand. And that's what I feel is my point here, is to just proclaim it openly and honestly, and make people deal with this reality, as opposed to the other nonsensical analysis. Well, you know what? We really have to worry about Iran getting a nuclear weapon, because Iran has declared that they will perpetrate a Holocaust against Israel. And that is explaining what Trump is doing. Trump is really the hero, right? That's one explanation to what's going on. Another one is Israel controls the United States. So Israel is getting the United States to fight Israel's war and defeat their regional rival. Like, that's another explanation for what's going on. And it doesn't make sense. Neither one of those makes sense. What makes sense is, again, I argue, is what I've been saying and writing about for years, is it's global geopolitics. It's pursuing global hegemony for the transnational oligarch class, the Western transnational oligarch class. And we're going to see, and we've already seen, from my perspective, like, this has been proven true with all of the events that we've seen, and it's going to be proven more true. But it is still predictive insofar as it hasn't targeted China fully yet. And when it does target China fully, then we will see that China was absolutely correct to play the game how they've been playing it. and Western demands that they do more or escalate before is necessary, I think are foolish. And I think time will prove that to be correct. But you guys are good to let me grandstand and say what I think.
As far as Israel goes, and I've said this on this show before, whoever wins this war will become a superpower, a global power. If Iran is defeated, Israel will become a global superpower, and they will not need the USA. The Middle East has a population of more than 500 million people. The reason Israel is not a superpower now is because of Iran. Saddam got taken out of the picture. Iran is all that's left. If Iran gets taken down, Israel will be the top dog in the Middle East. That economic bloc will be stronger than the USA. They won't need the USA anymore. They can throw the USA in the trash. Because even the substantial aid the U.S. sends to Israel, more than $3 billion a year, still that's nothing. If Israel is the superpower of the Middle East, owns the Middle East, they don't even need $3 billion. They can wipe their ass with $3 billion. But if Iran wins, they will become a world power. They will emerge from this war as a serious world power that is in the peer group of Russia, USA, China. They will have to be respected as a world power if they win.
Point 2 is solid. Point 1 is pretty shaky. I can't see Israel as a independent power.
What do they have? 20 million people?
Why wouldn't they be?
10 million people, no resources, except some gas, right?
They've got 30 miles
minimal industry
from the border to the sea.
My point is,
tiny population.
If they defeated Iran and they were just in control of the Middle East, they had Greater Israel, as they call it.
Yeah, but with whose population can they control the whole Middle East?
No, because the Gulf states are already in Israel's pockets right now. What's preventing them from controlling?
No, they're in our pocket, not Israel's.
Well, it's debatable. I think the Saudis. Do you think the Saudis and the Egyptians wouldn't gladly align with Israel if it paid well?
Well, okay. So my point about all of that analysis is that it's fundamentally flawed because it's predicated on this idea of nation states and seeing things only in terms of nation states. And I think a much better approach is to understand that Israel is just the California of West Asia. It is the same substance as all of the states controlled by Western imperialism. And so it's the transnational oligarchy that controls the United States also controls Israel. And there's, they're working together for the same objective. And it's, hegemony in the world by this transnational class of oligarchs. And so Israel is a weapon, just like the state of California's weapon, but Israel is a frontline weapon that, can be, exploited, utilized, sacrificed, weaponized, in furtherance of this agenda of global hegemony. And of course, we know the Middle East is a very important region of the world. So much energy, comes from there that the world consumes. And so again, what we see is Israel being weaponized, and they ultimately, Israel might be utilized to hit Iran with nukes. I mean, that is a possibility. I definitely can't rule that out. But we see how Israel is being weaponized as a land-based aircraft carrier of Western imperialism to attack this intransigent sovereign rival that threatens, Western global hegemony. And so to speak of it as if that is not true, and as if there's nation states, and as if the United States is
China. Is China a nation state? Or is it the global plural? Is China a nation state?
No, China, like Iran and Russia, they're sovereign, independent nation states that resist, Western imperialism. But Israel isn't. Israel is owned by the Western imperialists.
Right,
Israel is a colony. I mean, it's there. So they're no different than the colony of California. And so to see them as a distinct, separate nation state is buying into a liberal framework that is not predicated on reality. And liberalism isn't predicated on reality. But you've heard me make this argument before, Ian, so I don't know why you're looking so perplexed and confused.
Well,
I say this all the time
Chinese,
when I talk about liberalism.
When I pose this question to the Chinese, the English-speaking Chinese, they all tell me that, Iran isn't their concern, Russia isn't their concern, it's just China.
She has told you that?
Yes, Billy Bob. She personally told me that. I mean,
who cares? What about your anecdotal evidence about individual English-speaking Chinese means nothing to me.
On what she does. I mean, it's like why do you know what she does or doesn't?
Well, I think I share his ideology, right? I think I share his fundamental ideology, his worldview, and of the Communist Party. Like, that's it. I mean. And that's something Westerners have no idea of. They're so ideologically ignorant. They don't even understand that, there's a battle for ideology, that there's a competition among ideologies. Like, they don't even understand that. And so, I get frustrated. But I think that in the competition for ideological dominance between liberalism and socialism, socialism is correct. It's grounded on reality. And liberalism is a fake, dishonest explanation that is designed to facilitate capitalist dictatorship. It's designed to facilitate the ownership class as the ruling class. And so this is, again, something that she understands acutely and keenly, and the entire Communist Party of China also understands it. And so that's why I don't really care what an individual English-speaking Chinese person says. I care more about what the Communist Party of China says. And I think I understand and share their perspective.
So the second part of my statement, that was the first part. So the problem that Russia, Iran, and China and everybody runs into is that anytime you give concessions, the U.S. takes it. And I think it's actually not even just a U.S. thing. It's any predatory mindset will take it. Will perceive it this way. If you give concessions, they say, well, if I keep doing that, I'll get more concessions. That will inevitably leads to a hot war, because they just push and push and push until you get to the point where you either have to just collapse or you go into a war. And that's what Iran got thrust into. That's what Russia got thrust into. So I don't understand this mindset of China's supporters that, they can just endlessly capitulate to U.S. demands, and it will never come to the point where they have to choose between collapsing and a hot war. Because I don't look at China on the map. I don't look at China on the map right now and see that they're in a strong position. Their neighbors, except for Russia, are mostly aligned with the USA. Russia is in a hot war itself. So Venezuela is folded. Iran is also not at this moment in a hot war, but basically in a war and under siege. So who does China have in their? North Korea decide is there one actually? Is actually the one formal alliance, military alliance that China has? And they went and got their own nuclear weapons and signed a different military alliance with Russia, but I don't. What is this? What's the lot? Maybe my question is, what is the logic to thinking that this will not end in a hot war, and that endlessly, taking a step backwards for two steps forward?
When you have two people that share the same planet, like, only one person has to decide whether the war will be hot or not. And so China doesn't have any control over that. It's going to be the West's decision what they want to do. And so, again, China is not interested in escalation. China is on a trajectory to win. The window of opportunity is closing very quickly for Western imperialism. And so we're going to see what they do. And China will respond decisively. And China will ultimately demonstrate that they won this, 10 years ago, and it'll be obvious. So, I don't blame China for not being escalatory before they is necessary. Like, why would they do that? So that's it. I mean, I'm totally confident that, China is not acting from weakness. They are not acting out of, cuckery, if that's a word. And again, like when they were directly attacked with those sanctions, right? Like they responded, they reciprocated, and the U.S. backed the fuck down. And so, we'll see how far the U.S. is willing to go. And I think they're willing to go pretty far because they're desperate. They don't have any morals, and they're not going to sacrifice themselves. The oligarch class, they're going to get through this global conflagration just fine because they are billionaires. And so they have their luxury bunkers, and they're going to be asking, the people of the world to sacrifice. And they're also going to be telling the people of the world that, hey, it's not us causing you to sacrifice. It's China, it's Iran. And so the point is, don't believe them because that's not what is happening. And so again, if my predictive framework is way too predictive for a lot of minds to agree with, give it some time. And I don't think it's going to take much time at all. And it'll be very clear, exactly, what I'm saying is grounded in a real thing. And it's grounded in a socialist framework. It's grounded in an understanding about how the ownership class, forms itself into an empire, and then, does everything without any kind of moral or lawful restraint to pursue its hegemonic interests. And so because of that, and because they own the propaganda apparatus, because they're able to, get people's opinions and turn them exactly 180 degrees from where they should be, they feel emboldened to embark upon this very dangerous adventurism predicated on, manufacturing a global scarcity of energy, monopolizing that energy, weaponizing it against China. Like, this is what they're going to do. And they're going to do it because they feel they can get away with it, and they're not going to be held accountable for it. And it's their best chance to fucking win, to beat China from their perspective. It's not going to work. You were correct in that. But I will say that that'll be my final statement for today. And I'll, if you guys want to rebut, I might want to say one more thing, but we'll see. Greg, any thoughts about my diatribe?
Yeah. I can't, prove or disprove your central thesis, but I mean, I tend to think this is a giant fuck up more than anything. That if this is the goal and the strategy, this is a disaster. The oligarchs cannot handle this. They're not going to survive it better than China or rivals, and are going to have a wicked time here domestically.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's going to be catastrophic, but again, I think it's planned. I think it's planned catastrophe. So I think that's maybe where we just disagree fundamentally. You're seeing they fucked themselves and painted themselves.
Yeah, I think most of the ruling class would not have chose to do this right now. This is
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard to take a poll of the ruling class and see who's down and who's not. But ultimately, you've got factions in power that are empowered to make these decisions, right? And so that's kind of how class rule works. You have to have decision makers, and you have to empower them with the ability to identify strategies and pursue strategies. And so I feel that the people in place have been put there, by the consensus, and they've been empowered to do what they're doing. And that's why you see the votes in Congress. Oh, shoot, one Democrat. Oh, man. Right. We didn't see that.
Yeah, coming. I mean, I've probably said on the show that, I think the Democrats basically feel there's a crisis in imperialism. They don't know what to do. And so they've been running really bad candidates and turning it over to Trump. But
yeah,
you don't know what to do either.
They're not in opposition. The point is, they're not in opposition to this plan. They're not in opposition to Trump dragging the world into global economic catastrophe. They're not opposing that. and they're happy it's him because they didn't want to have to do it themselves, because that would be tough. Then they would look bad.
Yeah,
So
I
much
mean, I
better
would
strategy.
say they probably don't think it's a good idea. They wouldn't have done it themselves, but they didn't know what to do, so they're giving him a shot.
Thank you, Greg, for joining us and for your analysis. Ian, any final thoughts before we?
No, that's a good final note, I think, to end on.
Okay, maybe Friday we'll reconvene, and maybe a lot of things will have happened. If nothing happens, maybe I won't reconvene because I don't want to be told I was wrong. I don't want to hear it, but that's not true. So yeah, we'll probably reconvene on Friday. So we had a lot of good commenters with their comments. I didn't get to many of them, but I will after the program. And then, yeah, I just want to thank everybody for listening, and we will reconvene on Friday. Thank you very much.